I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because my mother was a better person than you'll ever be.
The clock showed 11:47 p.m. when I heard the first knock. I was in my kitchen, putting away the last of the dinner dishes. My husband James had been dead for 3 years now, and I had grown used to the quiet evenings alone. The house felt too big sometimes, but it was filled with memories of our 42 years together. The second knock came harder, more urgent. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and walked to the front door, my slippers shuffling across the hardwood floor. Through the peephole, I could see a woman standing on my porch. She looked to be in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Something about her face made my stomach clench. I opened the door with a chain still attached. "Can I help you? Are you Eleanor Walsh?" Her voice was steady, but I could hear something underneath it. Something that made my hands shake. "Yes, I am. Do I know you?" She looked directly at me then, and I saw James's eyes staring back at me. The same green eyes that had looked at me across the breakfast table for decades. The same eyes I had kissed goodnight thousands of times. "My name is Emma Reynolds. I think you knew my mother." Her name was Catherine Brooks. The world tilted. I gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. Catherine Brooks. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in 38 years. I had buried it so deep in my memory that sometimes I could pretend it never happened. But standing on my porch was living proof that some things refused to stay buried. "I don't know what you're talking about." The lie came out automatically, but my voice cracked on the words. Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. Even through the crack in the door, I could see it clearly. It was James, but younger. Much younger. He was standing next to a woman with long brown hair and kind eyes. His arm was around her waist, and they were both smiling. She kept this picture until the day she died last month.
"She told me about you before she passed."
She told me about my father. I closed my eyes, but the image burned behind my eyelids. James at 25, before we were married. Before I knew him. Before our life together began. But not before he loved someone else. Not before he made promises he would break. "I need to know the truth," Rachel said. "I need to know why he left her. Why he left me." I wanted to slam the door. I wanted to pretend this was just a nightmare and that I would wake up in my bed upstairs. But I could not move. This woman, this girl, had James's chin too. The same stubborn set of his jaw when he was determined about something. "Mrs. Henderson, I know this is hard. But my mother is gone now, and you're the only person who can tell me what really happened." I thought about James, about the man I had loved and married and buried. I thought about the secret he had carried until his death. The secret I had helped him keep. For 38 years, I had been the only person who knew the truth about why he left Catherine Brooks. The only person who knew what we had done. My hands fumbled with the chain lock. I opened the door wider and stepped back. "Come in," I whispered. Rachel walked into my living room and sat down on the edge of my couch. I took the chair across from her, the same chair where James used to read his evening paper. My heart was beating so fast I was afraid it might stop altogether. "Your mother," I said slowly. "What did she tell you about your father?" She said his name was James Henderson. She said they were engaged to be married in 1965. She said he disappeared one day without any explanation. She tried to find him, but it was like he had vanished from the earth. 3 months later, she discovered she was pregnant with me. I felt sick. All these years, I had told myself that Linda must have moved on, that she had found someone else and lived a happy life. I had convinced myself that what James and I did was just young love, just two people who could not help falling for each other. I had never let myself think about the woman he left behind. I had never let myself think about the child. "She never married," Rachel continued. "She worked 2 jobs to raise me alone. She always told me my father was a good man who just got scared. She never said a bad word about him, not once. But I could see the sadness in her eyes whenever I asked about him."
The tears started then.
I had not cried in front of another person since James's funeral, but now I could not stop them. This woman, this daughter of his, had lived her whole life wondering about her father. And I was part of the reason why. Mrs. Henderson, what happened? Why did he leave her? I looked at her sitting there, waiting for an answer that would change everything she thought she knew about her parents, about herself,
About me.
I thought about the lie I could tell her, the story I could make up that would be easier for everyone. But looking into those green eyes, James's eyes, I knew I could not do it anymore. Because of me, I said. He left her because of me. Rachel leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. What do you mean? I took a deep breath. After 38 years of silence, the words felt strange in my mouth, heavy and sharp and dangerous. I was Linda's best friend, her maid of honor. I was the one who introduced her to your father. And then I fell in love with him myself. The room was completely quiet except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Rachel stared at me, and I watched as the pieces began to fall into place in her mind. You stole him, she said finally. Yes, I whispered. I stole him. And with that one word, my life, as I had known it, came to an end. People always said Linda and I were like sisters. We met in college, two girls from small towns who found each other in the big city. We studied together, laughed together, dreamed together about the lives we would build. She was the kind of friend who would drive across town at midnight if you needed her. The kind who remembered your birthday every year and always knew exactly what to say when your heart was broken. When she met James at a campus mixer in 1963, she glowed. I had never seen her so happy. He was studying business, serious and steady in a way that made her feel safe. She brought him around to meet me the week after they started dating, proud as anything to show him off. Margaret, this is James, she had said, beaming. James, this is my best friend in the whole world. He shook my hand and smiled, and something inside me shifted. It was not love at first sight like in the movies. It was more like recognition, as if I had been waiting my whole life to meet this particular man. But he was Linda's, and I pushed the feeling down deep where it could not hurt anyone. I watched them fall in love over the next 2 years. I was there when he gave her his class ring. I helped her pick out the engagement ring when he took her shopping. I listened to her plan their wedding, right down to the flowers she wanted in her bouquet. White roses with baby's breath. She had it all figured out. But I was there for other things too. I was there when James would stop by my apartment after fighting with Linda. I was there when he needed someone to talk to about his doubts and fears. Slowly, without meaning to, I became the person he turned to when things got complicated. She wants everything planned out, he told me one evening in the spring of 1965. We were sitting on my small balcony, drinking coffee and watching the sunset. The wedding, the house, the children we'll have. Sometimes I feel like I can't breathe. That's just because you love her, I said. It's scary when you love someone that much. He looked at me then with those green eyes, and I felt my heart skip. Is it wrong that I feel more like myself when I'm with you? I should have told him to leave. I should have reminded him that he was engaged to my best friend. Instead, I said, no, it's not wrong. That was the beginning of the lies. Small ones at first. When Linda asked where James had been, I would make up excuses for him. When she wondered why he seemed distant, I would reassure her that all men got nervous before their wedding. I became an expert at covering for him, at making sure she never suspected that he spent his free time at my apartment instead of his own. The worst part was how easy it became to lie to her. Linda trusted me completely, and I used that trust against her. When she would call crying because James had canceled another date, I would comfort her and promise that everything would work out. Then I would hang up the phone and wait for him to knock on my door. We told ourselves we were just friends. Even when we started taking long walks together in the evenings. Even when he started bringing me flowers for no reason. Even when we would sit talking until 3 a.m, sharing our dreams and fears. We never called it what it was. The first time he kissed me was 3 months before his wedding. We were in my kitchen, and I was making dinner for both of us. Linda thought he was at his part-time job. He came up behind me while I was stirring the sauce and put his arms around my waist. Margaret, he whispered against my hair. I should have pulled away. I should have reminded him about Linda, about their engagement, about what was right. Instead, I turned around and let him kiss me. After that, there was no pretending anymore. We were in love, and we were living a lie. Every day I saw Linda, planning her wedding and talking about her future with James. Every night James came to my apartment, and we pretended we were the only two people in the world. "I can't marry her," he said one evening in May. "I can't stand at that altar and promise to love her when I'm in love with you." But what about Linda? What about all the plans she's made? I'll tell her the truth. I'll tell her I fell in love with someone else. You can't tell her it's me, James. It would destroy her. He held my face in his hands. Then come away with me. We'll leave town together. Start over somewhere else where no one knows us. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to run away with him and never look back. But I thought about Linda, about how she would feel when both her fiancé and her best friend disappeared from her life on the same day. I thought about the questions people would ask, the conclusions they would draw. "Give me some time to think about it," I said. But I had already made up my mind. I was going to help him disappear, and I was going to stay behind to comfort Linda. I was going to sacrifice my own happiness to protect my friend from the truth about what I had done to her. 2 weeks before the wedding, James withdrew all his money from the bank and bought a bus ticket to California. He left Linda a letter saying he could not go through with the marriage, that he needed time to figure out his life. He did not mention me. Linda was heartbroken. She cried for weeks. She kept asking me why he would leave, what she had done wrong. I held her while she sobbed and told her it was not her fault. I helped her return the wedding gifts and cancel the reception. I was the perfect friend, the loyal companion who would see her through the worst heartbreak of her life. But at night, when I was alone in my apartment, I would read the letters James sent me from California. He begged me to come to him. He sent me his address and promised that we could build a life together far from the mess we had made. He told me he loved me and that he could not live without me. 3 months after he left, I got on a bus to California myself. I told Linda I needed to get away for a while, to clear my head and figure out what I wanted to do with my life. She understood. She even drove me to the bus station and hugged me goodbye. "Thank you for being such a good friend," she said through her tears. "I don't know what I would have done without you." I almost told her the truth then. Almost confessed everything right there on the platform. But the bus was boarding, and James was waiting for me, and I was tired of doing the right thing. I was tired of being the good friend who put everyone else's happiness before her own. So I got on that bus and left Linda behind with her broken heart and her unanswered questions. I traveled across the country to marry the man she thought she was going to spend her life with. And I never looked back. For 38 years, I told myself that what we did was just love. That sometimes love makes you do things you never thought you could do. That sometimes the heart wants what it wants, and there is no point in fighting it. But sitting in my living room with Rachel, looking into James's eyes in a stranger's face, I finally understood the truth. It was not love that made me betray my best friend. It was selfishness. It was cowardice. It was the worst kind of cruelty, dressed up in pretty words and noble intentions. And now, after all these years, that cruelty had come home. After James and I married in California, we built what looked like a perfect life. We had a small wedding at City Hall with 2 strangers as witnesses. No family, no friends from home. We told ourselves it was romantic, just the 2 of us starting fresh. But really, it was just easier than facing the people we had left behind. James got a job at a bank, and I worked as a secretary. We rented a tiny apartment near the beach and spent our evenings walking along the shore, talking about our future. We would have children someday, we said. We would buy a house with a garden. We would grow old together and forget all about the painful way our love story began. For a while, it worked. James was attentive and sweet, bringing me flowers every Friday and taking me dancing on Saturday nights. He seemed lighter somehow, freed from the weight of living a double life. We were genuinely happy, or at least I thought we were. But even in those early months, I could feel something eating at me from the inside. Late at night, when James was sleeping peacefully beside me, I would lie awake thinking about Linda. I wondered what she was doing, whether she had found someone new, whether she ever thought about me. I had sent her one letter after James and I married, a carefully crafted note saying I had decided to stay in California and start over. I never mentioned James. I never told her I had found love. I just let her assume I was building a new life alone. She wrote back once, a sweet letter telling me she missed me and hoped I was happy. She said she was doing better, that she had started dating someone new. She asked if I would come home for Christmas. I never answered that letter. I told myself it was kinder to let our friendship fade away naturally than to keep lying to her. But really, I was just a coward who could not face what I had done. The guilt followed me everywhere. When James and I went to dinner at nice restaurants, I would think about Linda eating alone in her small apartment. When we celebrated our first anniversary, I remembered that it should have been her anniversary too. When James surprised me with a necklace for my birthday, I wondered if he had planned to give Linda jewelry like that. "Are you happy?" James asked me one evening after we had been married about a year. We were sitting on our little balcony, watching the sun set over the ocean. "Of course I'm happy," I said automatically. "Why would you ask that? You seem sad sometimes."
Distant.
Like you're thinking about something else. I wanted to tell him about the weight I carried, about the nightmares where Linda found out the truth, about the way I felt sick every time I thought about our wedding day. But I was afraid that if I admitted the guilt was eating me alive, he would start to feel it too. And then what would become of us? "I'm just tired," I lied. "Work has been busy." He reached over and took my hand. "I hope you don't regret what we did. I hope you don't regret choosing me." "Never," I said, and that part was true. I did not regret loving James. I only regretted the way we had hurt Linda in the process. 3 years into our marriage, I got pregnant. I was thrilled at first, imagining the family we would build together. But as my belly grew, so did my anxiety. This baby would be a symbol of everything James and I had built on Linda's broken heart. How could I raise a child born from such a betrayal? The baby, a little boy we named Thomas, was born on a rainy Tuesday in March. James cried when he held him for the first time, and I fell in love instantly with this tiny person who had his father's eyes and my stubborn chin. For a few precious weeks, the guilt faded into the background as we focused on learning to be parents. But it came back stronger than ever when Thomas was 6 months old. I was pushing him in his stroller through the park when I saw a woman playing with her daughter on the playground. Something about her profile reminded me so much of Linda that I had to sit down on a bench to catch my breath. I realized then that Linda might have children of her own by now. Children who would have been James's if things had gone differently. That night, after Thomas was asleep, I broke down completely. I told James about the woman in the park, about how I could not stop thinking about Linda, about how guilty I felt every single day. "Maybe we should tell her," I said through my tears. "Maybe we should write to her and explain what happened. Maybe she deserves to know the truth." James held me while I cried, but I could feel him pulling away even as he comforted me. "Margaret, that would only hurt her more. It's been 4 years. She's probably moved on with her life. Why would we want to drag her back into all of this pain? But what if she hasn't moved on? What if she's still wondering what she did wrong? Then that's something she'll have to work through on her own. We can't fix the past, Margaret. We can only try to build a good future." I wanted to argue with him, but I was exhausted from carrying the weight of our secret. It was easier to let him convince me that silence was kindness, that keeping the truth buried was the generous thing to do. So I dried my tears and went back to pretending that everything was fine. But everything was not fine. The guilt was like a poison in my system, affecting every part of my life. I became overprotective of Thomas, as if something terrible would happen to him as punishment for what I had done to Linda. I struggled to make friends with other mothers because I was afraid they would somehow see through me and realize I was not a good person. I smiled and laughed and played the role of the happy wife and mother, but inside I felt hollow. James noticed the change in me, and it began to affect our marriage. He grew frustrated with my moods and my tendency to withdraw into myself. We started arguing more, usually about small things that did not really matter. But underneath every fight was the bigger issue we could not talk about, the foundation of lies our marriage was built on. "I feel like I'm living with a stranger," he said to me one night after a particularly bad argument about something I cannot even remember now. "You're not the woman I fell in love with anymore." Maybe the woman you fell in love with never really existed, I said bitterly. Maybe she was just someone who was good at lying to herself. We went to bed angry that night, lying as far apart as possible in our queen-sized bed. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was what Linda felt like in the months before her wedding, like she was losing the person she loved most in the world, but could not figure out how to save him. The next morning, James apologized and brought me coffee in bed. We made up the way married couples do, but something fundamental had shifted between us. We both knew now that our perfect new life in California was not quite as perfect as we had pretended it was. Years passed, and we learned to live with the weight of what we had done. We had 2 more children, Rachel, and I named her that without thinking about my friend from college, or maybe I named her that because I could not stop thinking about her, and Benjamin. We bought the house with the garden that we had dreamed about. James got promoted at the bank, and I threw myself into being a mother and community volunteer. From the outside, we looked like the ideal family. But inside, I never stopped carrying the guilt. It was always there, a constant ache that I learned to ignore but never learned to heal. Every Mother's Day, I wondered if Linda had children. Every Christmas, I wondered if she was alone. Every anniversary, I remembered that it should have been her day to celebrate. I became an expert at pushing down the painful thoughts, at staying busy enough that I did not have time to dwell on the past. But late at night, when the house was quiet and my family was sleeping, the regret would wash over me like a tide. I would lie in bed next to James and wonder if I had ever really known happiness, or if I had just been very good at pretending to be happy. And now, with James gone and this grown woman sitting in my living room, I could see that all those years of regret had been preparing me for this moment. The moment when the past would finally catch up with me and demand an accounting for what I had done. Rachel sat in my living room for 3 hours that first night, asking questions I had spent 38 years dreading. Her voice stayed calm and steady, but I could see the anger building behind her eyes as the full story came out. The worst part was how she looked at me when she finally understood what I had done, not just to her mother, but to her. So while my mother was grieving, wondering what she had done wrong, "You were planning your wedding to the man she thought she was going to marry," Rachel said. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact that hung in the air between us like a blade. "Yes," I whispered. "And you never told her the truth. You let her spend her whole life thinking he just stopped loving her for no reason." "Yes." Rachel stood up and walked to my mantelpiece, where I kept family photos. She picked up my favorite picture of James and me on our 25th anniversary. We were smiling and holding hands, looking like the happiest couple in the world. "She had this old photograph of him," Rachel said without turning around. "The one I showed you tonight. She kept it in a shoebox in her closet with the letters he wrote to her before the wedding. Sometimes I would find her looking at them and crying. When I asked her about it, she would say she was just remembering the good times." I started crying again, but Rachel did not seem to notice or care. She put the photograph back on the mantel and turned to face me. "Do you want to know what my childhood was like, Mrs. Henderson? Do you want to know what it was like to grow up as the daughter of a woman whose heart you broke?" I did not want to know, but I owed her that much. "Tell me." My mother worked 60 hours a week to support us. She cleaned offices at night after her day job at the department store. She never complained, never said it was hard, but I could see how tired she was. I could see how she would look at other families and wonder what she had done to deserve being alone. Rachel walked back to the couch but did not sit down. She stood over me, and I felt small and ashamed under her gaze. She dated a few men over the years, but it never worked out. She would always compare them to my father, to the memory of this perfect man who had loved her and then vanished. No one could compete with a ghost. "I'm sorry," I said, but the words felt useless. When I was 16, I asked her why she never got married. She told me she had already found the love of her life, and when you find that kind of love, nothing else comes close. She said some people are lucky enough to have that kind of love for a whole lifetime, and others only get a taste of it before it's taken away. She said she was grateful for the taste she had. I put my hands over my face. I could not bear to look at Rachel anymore, could not bear to see the pain and anger in her expression. She was grateful, Mrs. Henderson. Grateful for the few years she had with a man who was planning to leave her for her best friend. Grateful for memories of someone who was lying to her the whole time they were together.
Please, I said.
Please stop. But Rachel was not finished. She had waited her whole life to tell this story to someone who needed to hear it. Do you know what she said to me when she was dying? Do you know what her last words about my father were? I shook my head. She said she hoped he had found happiness. She said she hoped that wherever he was, whatever had made him leave, he had built a good life for himself. She was dying, Mrs. Henderson, and she was worried about the happiness of the man who had abandoned her. The room was spinning. I felt like I was going to be sick. All these years, I had told myself that Linda had moved on, that she had found someone else, and lived a full life. I had convinced myself that our betrayal was just a painful memory from her youth, something she had worked through and left behind. She never knew about you, Rachel continued. She died believing that my father had just gotten scared and run away. She never knew that her best friend had stolen him. Maybe that was a mercy. Maybe the truth would have destroyed her completely. Rachel finally sat back down, but she leaned forward with her elbows on her knees, staring directly at me.
But I know now.
And I want you to understand what your choices cost my family. I grew up without a father because you wanted my mother's fiancé. My mother spent her whole life alone because you decided your happiness was more important than hers. And you got to live this beautiful life, didn't you? The house, the children, the long marriage, everything that should have been hers. I wanted to explain that it had not been beautiful, not really. I wanted to tell her about the guilt that had eaten at me for decades, about the way the secret had poisoned my marriage and my ability to be happy. But I knew it would sound like I was asking for sympathy, and I had no right to ask for that. Not from her. What do you want from me?
I asked.
I want you to tell me about my father. The real man. Not the saint my mother remembered. I want to know what he was really like. So I told her. I told her about James's sense of humor, the way he could make me laugh even when I was angry with him. I told her about his Sunday morning pancakes and his terrible singing voice and the way he cried at movies. I told her about his fear of spiders and his love of baseball and how he always fell asleep in his chair while reading the newspaper. I told her about his strengths and his weaknesses, his kindness and his selfishness. I painted a picture of a real human being instead of the perfect memory her mother had carried. It felt like the first honest thing I had said in years. When I finished, Rachel was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Did he ever talk about her? About my mother?" Sometimes, I admitted, especially in the early years. He felt guilty about leaving her the way he did, but not guilty enough to contact her. Not guilty enough to tell her about me. He didn't know about you, I said. Linda never told him she was pregnant. Of course she didn't. He had already made it clear that he didn't want the life they had planned together. Why would she tell him about the baby? Rachel stood up to leave then, and I panicked. I knew that once she walked out my door, she would tell people about what I had done. The secret I had guarded for nearly 4 decades would be exposed, and my comfortable life would be over. "What are you going to do now?" I asked. She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "I'm going to go home and grieve for my mother. And I'm going to try to figure out how to move forward with what I know now." "Are you going to tell people? About James and me?" "I haven't decided yet. Part of me thinks you deserve to have your reputation destroyed the way my mother's heart was destroyed. But part of me thinks that would just create more pain for your children and grandchildren, and they don't deserve to pay for what you did." She walked to the door, then turned back to look at me one more time. "You know what the saddest part is, Mrs. Henderson? My mother loved you. She talked about you sometimes, wondering what had happened to her best friend from college. She hoped you were happy. Even after everything, even without knowing what you had done, she still loved you. And then she was gone, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my carefully constructed life. I sat in my living room until dawn, staring at the family photographs on my mantel and wondering how I was going to live with the weight of the truth finally being spoken aloud. The breaking point had come at last, and I was not sure I would survive it. The days after Rachel's visit blurred together in a haze of sleepless nights and restless wandering through my empty house. I could not eat, could barely force myself to shower or get dressed. Every room held memories of the life James and I had built together, and now all of those memories felt tainted by the knowledge that someone else should have been living this life instead of me. I kept expecting the phone to ring, expecting angry calls from people Rachel had told about my betrayal. But the phone stayed silent. Days turned into a week, and still nothing happened. The quiet was almost worse than confrontation would have been. It gave me too much time to think, too much time to replay every moment of that night in my mind. Finally, I could not stand the waiting anymore. I needed to know what Rachel had decided to do. I needed to know if my secret was still safe or if my world was about to come crashing down around me. So, I did something I had not done in 38 years. I started looking for information about Linda's family. It took me 3 days of searching online and making phone calls before I found Rachel's address. She lived about 2 hours away, in the same town where Linda had grown up. The same town where James and I had met her all those years ago. The thought of going back there terrified me, but I knew I had to face this properly. I had spent too many years hiding from the truth. I drove there on a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were changing colors, and the town looked smaller than I remembered, but otherwise much the same. I drove past the college where the three of us had met, past the church where Linda and James should have been married. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to pull over twice to calm myself down. Rachel's house was a small blue cottage with a neat garden in front. There was a car in the driveway and toys scattered on the porch, evidence of children I had not known existed. The thought that I had grandchildren I would never know, could never know, hit me like a physical blow. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, trying to work up the courage to knock on her door. Finally, I saw a curtain move in the front window, and I knew she had seen me sitting there like a coward. I got out of the car and walked to her front door on unsteady legs. Rachel opened the door before I could knock. She looked tired and older than she had just a week ago. Behind her, I could hear children's voices and the sound of morning cartoons on television. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, "I wondered if you would come." "I had to," I said. "I had to know what you decided to do. And I had to tell you something." She stepped aside to let me in. The living room was warm and cluttered in the way that houses with young children always are. There were family photos on every surface. Pictures of Rachel with a man I assumed was her husband. Pictures of 2 young children at various ages. It looked like a happy home, and I felt a stab of gratitude that at least one person in this mess had managed to build something good. "Kids, go play upstairs for a while," Rachel called out. 2 children, a boy about 8 and a girl about 5, ran past us toward the staircase. The boy had James's green eyes, and seeing them in yet another generation made my chest tight. "Your children," I said. "They're beautiful." "Thank you." Rachel's voice was polite but distant. "What did you want to tell me?" I sat down on her couch, trying to find the right words for what I needed to say. "I wanted to tell you that you're right. About everything. About what I did to your mother, about the life she should have had. I've spent 38 years trying to convince myself that what James and I did was just love, that we couldn't help ourselves. But that's not true." Rachel sat down across from me, waiting for me to continue. "The truth is, I was selfish. I wanted what she had, and I took it. I told myself I was protecting her by not telling her the truth, but really, I was just protecting myself. I was too much of a coward to face what I had done. Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I need you to know that I understand. I need you to know that I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect you to keep my secret just to spare my feelings. If you want to tell people what I did, I deserve whatever comes from that." Rachel was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. "Do you want to know what I've been doing this past week?" I nodded. "I've been reading my mother's journals. She kept them for most of her adult life. I found them when I was cleaning out her house after she died, but I couldn't bring myself to read them until now." Rachel got up and went to a bookshelf in the corner. She came back with a small stack of notebooks, all different colors and sizes. "She wrote about you," Rachel said, opening one of the books. "Not a lot, but enough. She wondered about you over the years. She hoped you were well. In 1987, she wrote that she had tried to find you through the alumni directory, but you had moved and left no forwarding address. She flipped through several pages and stopped at an entry. This one is from 1992. She wrote, "I dreamed about Margaret last night. We were back in college, studying for finals and eating too much pizza. I woke up missing her so much it hurt. I wonder if she ever thinks about me. I wonder if she's happy, wherever she is. I hope she found the kind of love I thought I had with James. I hope she didn't end up as alone as I did." The words hit me like a slap. All those years when I had been living my comfortable life with James and our children, Linda had been missing me. Missing the friend who had betrayed her in the worst possible way. "There are dozens of entries like that," Rachel said, closing the journal. "For 38 years, she missed her best friend. She never stopped loving you, even though you abandoned her when she needed you most." I was crying again, but this time the tears felt different. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of genuine grief for what I had cost Linda. For the friendship I had thrown away for the sake of a man who, if I was being honest, had never made me as happy as I had pretended to be. "I don't know how to live with this," I whispered. "Neither do I," Rachel said. "But I've made a decision about what to do with what I know." My heart stopped. "What kind of decision?" "I'm not going to tell anyone about you and my father. Not your children, not my friends, not anyone." I felt a rush of relief, so strong it made me dizzy. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "I'm not doing it for you," Rachel said firmly. "I'm doing it because my mother wouldn't have wanted me to destroy another family, even the family that was built on her broken heart. She was a better person than that. Better than you, certainly. But also better than the person I would become if I chose revenge." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at her children's toys scattered in the yard. "But I have conditions," she said without turning around. "Anything. Whatever you want. I want you to tell me everything about my father. Not just the good parts, but everything. I want to know what he was like as a husband and a father. I want to know about his flaws and his mistakes. I want to know the real man, not the fantasy my mother carried. I can do that. And I want you to tell me about my half-siblings. I want to know about Thomas and Rachel and Benjamin. I want to know if they're good people, if they're happy, if they have children of their own." The thought of talking about my children with this woman felt strange and painful, but I knew I owed her that much. They are good people. Better than me, I think. They all turned out kind and decent despite having parents who built their marriage on a lie. "Do they know about how you and their father got together?"
No.
"They think we met after he broke up with his college girlfriend. They don't know about you or your mother." Rachel finally turned back to face me. "Maybe someday I'll want to meet them. I haven't decided yet. But if I do, I want your promise that you won't try to stop me." "You have it. But Rachel, if you do decide to meet them, please don't tell them the whole truth. They loved their father. They don't need to know that he was capable of the kind of betrayal we committed." "I'll think about it. But I'm not making any promises about protecting your reputation with your own children." We spent the rest of the morning talking. I told Rachel everything I could remember about James, his habits and quirks, his parenting style, his career, his health problems in later years. I told her about our children, about their personalities and accomplishments and struggles. I showed her pictures on my phone of Thomas's wedding and Rachel's graduation and Benjamin's children. When I finally got ready to leave, Rachel walked me to the door. "Mrs. Henderson, I want you to understand something. I'm not keeping your secret because I forgive you. I'm keeping it because my mother would have wanted me to choose kindness over justice. But you'll have to live with what you did for the rest of your life, and that seems like punishment enough." I drove home in a daze, feeling both grateful and devastated. Rachel had given me the gift of silence, but she had also forced me to see myself clearly for the first time in decades. I was not the victim in this story. I was not even really the heroine. I was the person who had caused all the pain in the first place. That night, I called my daughter Rachel, my Rachel, for the first time in weeks.
"She had been worried about me," she said.
I had seemed distant and sad lately, and she wondered if I was getting depressed living alone in the big house. "I'm okay," I told her, though that was not really true. "I've just been thinking about the past a lot lately. About choices I made when I was young." "What kind of choices?" I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to confess the whole story and ask for her forgiveness and her help in figuring out how to move forward. But I had made a promise to her half-sister, and I had to keep it. Just mistakes, honey. Things I wish I had done differently. Mom, we all make mistakes when we're young. The important thing is that you and Dad built a good life together. You were happy, weren't you? Yes, I said, and for the first time, I tried to think about whether that was actually true. Had I been happy? Or had I just been comfortable? Had I actually loved the life James and I built together? Or had I just been relieved to escape the consequences of what we had done? I love you, Mom. And if you need to talk about anything, I'm here. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to imagine what my life would have been like if I had made different choices all those years ago. What if I had told James to work things out with Linda? What if I had been a real friend to her instead of a jealous rival? What if I had been brave enough to step aside and let them have the life they had planned together? I would have been alone, probably. I might never have married or had children. I might have spent my life wondering what could have been with James. But Linda would have been happy. She would have had the husband and family she dreamed of. Her daughter would have grown up with a father who loved her instead of wondering about a man she would never meet. And maybe, just maybe, I would have found a different kind of love. A cleaner love, built on truth instead of lies. A love I could have been proud of instead of ashamed of. But it was too late for those kinds of thoughts now. I had made my choices, and I would have to live with them. The only thing left to do was try to find some way to make peace with the woman I had become and the pain I had caused. That night, I started writing letters I would never send. Letters to Linda, apologizing for everything I had stolen from her. Letters to Rachel, trying to explain the person I had been when I was young and scared and selfish. Letters to my own children, telling them the truth about their parents and asking for their forgiveness. I wrote until my hand cramped and my eyes were too swollen from crying to see the page clearly. And then I put all the letters in a box and hid them in my closet, right next to the wedding dress I had never been able to throw away. It was not redemption exactly, but it was the beginning of something. The beginning of trying to live with the truth instead of running from it. The beginning of acknowledging the real cost of the choices I had made all those years ago. And maybe, if I was very lucky, it was the beginning of learning how to forgive myself. Not because I deserved it, but because Linda would have wanted me to find peace. Even after everything I had done to her, she would have wanted me to find a way to heal. That was the kind of person she had been. The kind of friend I had never learned how to be. 6 months after Rachel walked back out of my life, I found myself sitting in a grief counseling group at the community center. It had taken me that long to work up the courage to walk through those doors, and even then I almost turned around 3 times in the parking lot. "My name is Margaret," I said when it was my turn to speak. "And I'm grieving someone I hurt very badly a long time ago. Someone who died before I could ask for her forgiveness." The other members of the group, mostly widows and widowers dealing with the loss of spouses, looked at me with curiosity and compassion. The group leader, a gentle woman named Helen who had lost her own husband 2 years earlier, encouraged me to continue. "I spent most of my life lying to myself about what I had done," I said. "Telling myself that it was just love, that I couldn't help it, that she was better off not knowing the truth. But recently I learned how much my actions really cost her, and I don't know how to live with that knowledge." I could not tell them the whole story, of course. I could not betray Rachel's trust by revealing the secret she had chosen to keep. But I could talk about the guilt and the regret and the weight of living with a lie for so many years. I could talk about the grief of losing someone I had loved and hurt in equal measure. The group became my lifeline over the following months. For the first time in my adult life, I was learning to be honest about my feelings, honest about my failures, honest about the person I really was underneath the pleasant exterior I had maintained for so long. Guilt can be a teacher, Helen told me after one particularly difficult session. It can show us where we went wrong and help us make better choices going forward. But at some point, you have to decide whether you're going to let it destroy you or transform you. I thought about those words for weeks. Was there a way to transform this crushing guilt into something useful? Was there a way to honor Linda's memory by becoming the kind of person I should have been all along? I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping women who had been betrayed and abandoned by people they trusted. It was hard work, emotionally draining work, but it felt right in a way that nothing had felt right for years. These women reminded me of Linda in some ways, strong and resilient, but carrying scars from wounds that should never have been inflicted. One woman in particular, a young mother named Maria whose husband had left her for her sister, became like a daughter to me. She had been so devastated by the betrayal that she could barely function, could barely take care of her two small children. I recognized something in her pain that spoke to my own experience, though from the other side. "How do you ever trust anyone again?" she asked me one afternoon as we folded donated clothes together in the shelter's storage room. "How do you believe that anyone will ever really love you when the person closest to you is capable of hurting you like that?" I thought about Linda, about how she had never remarried, never found the kind of love she had thought she had with James. I thought about the journal entries Rachel had read to me, full of longing and loneliness and questions that would never be answered. "I don't know," I told Maria honestly. "But I think maybe the point isn't to learn to trust again. Maybe the point is to learn to be the kind of person who deserves trust. To be the kind of person who would never inflict that kind of pain on someone else." As I said the words, I realized I was talking to myself as much as to her. For 38 years, I had focused on managing the consequences of my betrayal instead of really examining what kind of person I had been when I committed it. I had been so concerned with protecting my comfortable life that I had never bothered to change the fundamental selfishness that had created the problem in the first place. But it was not too late to change. I was 73 years old, but I was not dead yet. There was still time to become someone better, someone who honored the memory of the friend I had betrayed. I started reaching out to my own children more, really listening to them instead of just going through the motions of being a good mother and grandmother. I began telling them stories about their father that showed his flaws as well as his strengths, not the whole truth, but at least a more honest version of the man he had been. "Dad wasn't perfect," I told my son Thomas one evening when he was visiting. "He made mistakes, just like we all do. But he loved you kids, and he tried his best to be a good father." "I know he wasn't perfect, Mom," Thomas said gently. "Nobody is. But you and Dad gave us a good childhood. You gave us love and stability and values. That's what matters." I wondered what he would think if he knew that the stability he remembered had been built on Linda's heartbreak, that the love story he had grown up believing in was actually a story of betrayal and lies. But maybe that was not his burden to carry. Maybe some truths were too heavy to pass on to the next generation. I also started writing again, not letters I would never send this time, but real letters to real people. I wrote to old friends I had lost touch with over the years, reaching out to rebuild connections I had let wither through neglect and guilt. I wrote to distant relatives, to former neighbors, to anyone who had once been part of my life but had drifted away. Some of them wrote back, surprised and pleased to hear from me after so many years. We began tentative correspondences, sharing news about our families and our lives. It felt good to connect with people without pretense, without the constant fear that they might discover my secret and judge me for it. 1 year after Rachel's first visit, she called me. I was so surprised to hear her voice that I nearly dropped the phone. "Mrs. Henderson, I wanted to let you know that I've been thinking about what we discussed. About meeting my half-siblings." My heart started racing. "Have you decided what you want to do?" "I've decided I would like to meet them. But I want to do it honestly. I want to tell them who I am and let them decide for themselves whether they want a relationship with me." "Rachel, please. Think about what that would do to them. Think about how it would change the way they remember their father." "I have thought about it. For months. But Mrs. Henderson, they're adults. They have a right to know they have a sister. And I have a right to know my own family, even if that family was built on my mother's pain." I wanted to argue with her, to beg her to reconsider. But as I listened to her calm, steady voice, I realized she was right. My children deserved to know the truth about their family, even if it was painful. And Rachel deserved to know her siblings, even if it meant destroying the comfortable lives we had all been living with. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "I want you to tell them first. I want you to prepare them before I contact them directly. I think it would be easier for everyone if the truth came from you." The thought terrified me, but I knew she was right. My children deserve to hear this story from me, not from a stranger calling out of the blue claiming to be their sister. Will you give me some time to figure out how to do this?
Yes.
But not too much time. I've waited 38 years to know my family. I don't want to wait much longer. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to imagine telling my children the truth about their parents. How do you explain to your adult children that their entire understanding of their family history has been based on a lie? How do you tell them that their father abandoned a pregnant woman to marry you? How do you ask them to love you despite knowing what you're capable of? But as I sat there in the late afternoon sunlight, something strange happened. For the first time in decades, I felt something that might have been peace. Not happiness exactly, and certainly not pride, but a kind of quiet acceptance of who I was and what I had done. I was not a good person. I probably never would be, not completely. But I was trying to become someone better. I was trying to honor Linda's memory by learning to tell the truth, even when it hurt. I was trying to build real relationships based on honesty instead of comfortable relationships based on lies. The truth would come out now, and my children would have to decide for themselves whether they could still love me knowing what I had done. Some friendships would end. Some people would judge me harshly, and they would be right to do so. My comfortable life would be disrupted, maybe destroyed. But I would finally be free. Free from the weight of the secret I had carried for 38 years. Free from the constant fear of discovery. Free from the exhaustion of pretending to be someone I was not. I thought about Linda, about the woman she had been, and the life she should have lived. I could not give her back the years I had stolen from her. I could not undo the loneliness she had endured or the questions she had died without answering. But I could finally stop living the lie that had been built on her heartbreak. That evening, I called my children and asked them all to come for dinner the following Sunday. "There's something important I need to tell you," I said to each of them. "Something about your father and me that I should have told you a long time ago." As I made those phone calls, I felt something I had not felt since I was 25 years old and standing in Linda's apartment, listening to her plan her wedding to the man I loved. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, I felt like myself. Not the person I had pretended to be, not the comfortable lie I had been living, but my actual self, flawed and selfish and human, but finally honest. The sun was setting outside my kitchen window, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It was beautiful, and for once I let myself appreciate the beauty without the shadow of guilt clouding my vision. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations and painful revelations. There would be anger and disappointment and relationships that might never recover. But tonight I was free. Tonight, I was ready to tell the truth. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to call it a new dawn.